Hey everybody, this is Rafi at ZURB, and in this video we're going to cover the media object component in Foundation. So the media object helps you create a specific type of layout where there's usually an image or a video or something like that on one side and then text on the other side. Now what's unique about this specific component is that this component does not use any kind of floats or position absolute hacks to get this image to sit nicely on the side here, while this text in this remaining container actually takes up the remaining space. So let's take a look at how this component is created, and I'll explain all the different things that you can do with it. So this is also one of the most common patterns on the web. You will see a image on the left, or it could be an image on the right with some text next to it. And when you resize this, the text continues to shrink down to the available space while the image stays the same size. Now this is an important difference from the main Foundation grid. If you were to just create this using a let's say 3-column section here and then a 9-column section here, the grid columns will actually percentage-wise stay the same size no matter how small the screen gets. So what that means is that this image would actually be shrunk down depending on how much available space is needed. This media object is different because the image actually stays its natural size no matter how small the screen gets, and then the text or whatever's on the right side will actually shrink and grow as the available space allows. Okay, so how is this created? Let's take a look at the code on the side here. So we start with a media object class as a wrapper. So that's going to wrap two specific sections. So one of those sections is here, the media object section. And then the other section is also a media object section. Now you'll notice that this has a main section class on it as well, and that is necessary in the Flexbox version that allows this text section here to actually expand or grow. So this uses the Flex Grow property and allows it to grow to take up the remaining space. If you got rid of that, that wouldn't work the same way in the Flex version, although in the regular float version, you don't need that extra class. So we're in the Flex version here, so we'll leave that on there. So these media object sections just wrap the content. So we have an image here. Because it's first in the code, it's going to sit on the left. And then we have our text here in the other media object section. Now if I was to reverse these, and I totally could, so I will reverse these, and now we can have the image on the right. Now I can also have an image on the left and the right. And so the center section will just kind of take up any available space that's remaining. Of course, I can make these images any size, so I'm using a placeholder here. I can make this 50 pixels instead. And you'll see that now it's going to stay 50 pixels no matter what the screen size. So this is really handy also for building kind of like a commenting section. If you're doing like a blog post, intro, or something like that. All good use cases for this component. Another really cool thing that you can do with the media object is to align content either to the middle, top, or the bottom. So like in this docs example here, you could see that the image is aligned to the middle on the left and then aligned to the bottom on the right. So this starts to get really powerful now because it helps you align entire content sections with just one simple class. Now we are using the Flex version of Foundation, so the class to do it with the Flex version is one of the Foundation Flex helper classes, and that's going to be align self middle. So if we do that, now you can see that the image aligns itself to the middle of the height of this container. The height of this container is determined by the tallest piece in it. So it's actually this image over here on the right is a little bit taller than the text, and so that's what it's aligning itself in the middle of. Now, just to demonstrate that better, let's get rid of that image, and now you can see that now it's aligned to the tallest thing in the container, which is the text. So instead of align self middle, we could do align self bottom, and then you could see that. Now, if you were just using the regular float version, not the Flexbox version, then I could show you what those classes are. So we'll just change that. And so now, instead of align self, we're going to do middle. And that works that way, or bottom. So these alignment classes are really helpful for quickly aligning content. And you'll see that this is especially helpful if we did something like middle, and then we wanted to have a really big image, let's say like 400 pixels. Then we can go over to this side and then align it to the middle. So now we have a large feature image on the left, and then we have our description text on the right, and it's vertically centered. So this would be a lot harder to do without these alignment classes or the media object itself. You'd have to use position absolute and some kind of transform trick. So there's a few different ways to do it, but this makes it really simple and easy. So another really cool thing that you can do with the media object is to actually allow it to stack on a small screen. So there's not always going to be a situation where you want both of these things to sit side by side on all screen sizes. Maybe on a small screen it's just going to get too crowded and you'd rather them stack. So let's take a look at how we would do that. Alright, so we have our media object here, and you can see that the image is really huge, and then the text is going to get cramped at some point. So we get down to like this size screen, and already it's starting to get really cramped. Now we're in the small breakpoint, and it's just getting really jammed up, the text is. So we can add a class of stack for small, and we add that to the media object, and now this is going to nicely and neatly stack on a small screen. The other thing it's going to do is also make the image width 100%. Now you can override that in the CSS or in the settings file if you're using Sass, but this could be desirable if you have a high resolution and enough image, then it could look pretty good. So this is going to stack nicely on a small screen and then kind of unstack itself on medium and larger screens. Because essentially a media object is meant to have two sections sit side by side. But of course, when there's certain situations where that's not going to look nice, you can have them stack. So there might be circumstances where you need to nest a media object. A really common example, again, is if you have some kind of comment string where people are replying to each other. So that might be a good use case for nesting one of these media objects. And you can see what it does is indent it nicely, so that way you have kind of that hierarchy of what's the original comment and what's the response. And that's just one example of using that. So let's go ahead and adjust our example so we can take a look at what that looks like. So we don't need any extra classes for that. I'm going to create my avatar here. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Let's make it 100 pixels. And these are both aligned to the middle. It doesn't matter. You can do that, or you can have them align to the top by removing the middle class. And we'll go ahead and just do that so they're both aligned at the top. There we go. Okay, so now we're going to nest it inside of this media object. So if I just copy this media object here, and what I'm going to do is put that inside of this media object section. So I have this media object section that's essentially this area over here. It's nice and big. That's where I'm going to nest the media object inside. So let me space this out a bit so you could see it nice and easy, and then we'll fix that indentation. Indentation is very important. All right, so now you can see that there's a media object nested inside of a media object section. And what that does is it creates that nice hierarchy of a comment and then a response. And if I was going to continue nesting this to, add another response, maybe if this is the use case for this, then I would just continue inside that same media object. Now, if you continue nesting inside of another media object, like this media object section here, then it's going to indent even further. So it's really up to you what your use case is or how many deep you need to go. You might run out of room at some point having this type of setup, so probably one level of nesting is usually enough for most things. So last thing I want to mention on the media object is that while it's typically used with image and text, it can actually be used with quite a few other things. And so I just want to cover some other use cases for the media object. So here we have an image and some text, but then we can also use this instead with something like a button. So let's just do that. So we have our button here, and let's just say it's a button. So we can have some kind of content next to a button, and then we can align this to the middle if that feels better. So it's whatever the design dictates. And then we can also use it with another media object section on the other side, but instead of a button, let's say we want to make this an input, but maybe not a text input, let's do a checkbox. So this is a very common use case for a media object where you might have a checkbox to select this whole item. So again, and then this middle might help you align it, or you can use top or no class and then it'll align to the top, or you can do bottom and you need a space between those classes for that to work properly. There you go, where you have it aligned to the bottom. So these are just a couple of use cases that you can use the media object for. Instead of text in the middle too, it could be an input with just text. So lots of different use cases for the media object. It doesn't have to be just images. Now one note that I was aligning these to the middle, especially like this with the middle class. One thing to note is if you want it perfectly aligned in the middle, make sure that your objects don't have any margin bottom. So one thing I always do is just make sure I reset the margin bottom on specific components, just like this. That way that margin bottom doesn't affect its vertical alignment, because if it had margin bottom, then it wouldn't actually be directly in the middle of this piece of text here. So that's the media object. Tons and tons of cool use cases for it. It's really going to save you a lot of lines of code. So this is a really handy component. It has a flex mode, a flexbox mode, which is going to be default in Foundation 6.4. But then there's also a version in the flex mode or in the float mode as well. And then you have all these SAS variables in your settings file that you can adjust it as needed. And so there's a ton of other components in Foundation which we teach in our Intro to Foundation class, so make sure to check that out. I'll put the link below. And this is Rafi from the Foundation team signing off.